Hi ladies and gentlemen, this is Roy Potter again. I got a few questions asked of me about certain aspects of my last video, and so I thought I would go ahead and do this. This is going to be one of those Hebrew lessons and tie in some Egyptian as well, but I thought I should go ahead and do this. Now as a prelude to this, you may want to go back and look at, I have 5 videos that I did a little over a year ago. It was called Donald Trump and David Koresh, parts 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then I added an addendum, part 5. And that's really the important one for what we're going to talk about today. The others kind of touch on this, but for those of you who have the interest, I thought I should go ahead and mention it. So let me get right into it. What I said in the last video, we were talking about Zion and Zionism. Zion is actually how you'd say it in Hebrew. But at any rate, some people looked at that and they were smart enough to go look up some things, and so that's why I'm doing this video here, is to explain what's going on as far as how the word Zion is actually Egyptian and not Hebrew. It's kind of a hybrid. Now there's a difference between translation and transliteration, okay, and I'm not going to get into the differences of that right now, but basically transliteration is when you have a word in Hebrew, say Mitzrayim, and I've actually got it up here. Let me show it to you. It's right here, Mitzrayim. It means Egypt, and this is spelling it basically in a transliteration. In other words, phonetic sound for phonetic sound from Hebrew to English, and we get Mitzrayim, okay? That's a transliteration. The translation would be, of course, Egypt. Mitzrayim in the Hebrew actually means Egypt. Okay, do you see what that is? That's kind of a fundamental that you need to understand to where we're going with this, partially. Okay, but go back and look at that addendum number 5 to Donald Trump and David Koresh, and I think you'll even get a better indication of what we're talking about. Okay, so I brought up Zion, and people are saying, well, how is that Egyptian, and or have Egyptian history to it? What's going on there? Well, let me point out that first of all, the Israelites wanted to later on make sure that they had a separation from Egypt, even though they had close contacts. Jesus even went there for a while, okay, after he was born. So there were really some close ties to Egypt, but it's really covered up in the Bible for various reasons, which I won't get into here. But what I did want to get into is this word Zion, okay, Zion as it would be pronounced in Hebrew, because I made the statement that this actually tied back to a place in Egypt, not necessarily a hill in Jerusalem, although that's part of it too. It gets a little more complicated, but remember, the story here is, as I said in the last video, that Joseph was sold into Egypt, went down there, became the viceroy, possibly the pharaoh later on, brought his family, they settled in Goshen, started a place called On, right, which means Sun City, which that's in the Egyptian On, and it's even used in Hebrew that way. Heliopolis in Greek, Beth Shemesh in the actual Hebrew. Well, let's go look at this and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Hopefully you'll be able to hear me without me having to yell too much, because I'm not using a mic this time. I've got the camera fairly close. What you have to remember is that in ancient times, especially the Hebrews, most of what they had was passed down from mouth to ear until the information was dedicated to writing. And then, of course, over a period of time, that writing was redacted by a prophet we know as Ezra. And I could go into some details on Ezra, but I don't really think we want to go there right now. But we're going to use one of the examples from Ezra to illustrate what I'm going to show you here. So phonetics are what's important in language and etymology. The sounds are really what's important. So that's why I titled this Phonetics versus Spelling, okay? Because people went back to the Hebrew lexicon and said, wait a minute, Roy, Zion's not talking about a city of On. It's not spelled the same way. It's spelled, and I'll show you that here in a minute. But in fact, prophets often would misspell what we would consider to be misspelling a word to either emphasize something or, more importantly, to hide something, to keep it from the common eyes, especially people that don't understand what's going on. And in that second example, I'm going to show you that here. And I did this in part 5, that addendum, before when I did this. And I talked about Cyrus, Koresh is how it's pronounced actually. In Ezra, there are 2 different spellings for the name Koresh. And there was a reason for that, and I talked about it in that chapter 5 addendum. But if you go to Ezra 1:1 and Ezra 1:2, you'll see Koresh spelled 2 different ways. One's with a kaf, vav, resh, shin. The other is with a kaf, resh, shin. What's missing in the second one? Well, the vav. This is how it's spelled almost everywhere else in the Old Testament, is this one right here. This is the predominant one right here that's spelled. This one is an exception. Only found in Ezra, spelled this way twice. Okay? Why? He was putting emphasis and he was telling a secret. He was sending a prophetic message. And I've talked about that before. So prophets will sometimes, add letters or take them away, but the phonetics will still be the same. So it gets kind of complicated to people who aren't schooled in this or have studied it, but that's where we are. Okay, so we're going to jump back up to this, and I said in this last video that Egypt in Egyptian is zip-z, zip-z. Those are the phonetic sounds we want. That's not the Egyptian I've written there. I'm worried here about the phonetic equivalence, the transliteration. In actual Hebrew, as I've already pointed out, Egypt is Mitzrayim. Okay, that's right here, and it's written out in the Hebrew. Remember, we read Hebrew from right to left. So with that introduction, now I want to move to Zion, keeping in mind that the prophets sometimes change the spelling for a lot of reasons. In this case of Zion, it was to hide the fact that it's really talking about the connection to Egypt. Okay, a lot of good reasons for doing that. Okay, here it is in the transliteration of Zion into English, Zion actually. This is what it looks like in the Hebrew. This is a Zadeh, a Yod, a Vav, and a final form of a Nun. Zion is how you would spell that in Hebrew and pronounce it. You can look up, if you have Strong's Concordance, you can go to the word numbers 6725 and 6726, and you'll see these. Okay, that's how it's spelled. So when people looked at that, they got Z. Okay, we got that, but On in Hebrew, when you look it up, is spelled like this: Aleph, Vav, Nun, which isn't, this Vav and Nun here. So they're saying, so what's going on? And here you can go to word 204. I hope you can follow all this. Again, so what they're doing is they're changing the spelling, not the phonetic sound, which is what's really important, but the spelling to either add emphasis or to keep a secret hidden. So in actuality, what they've done here, I've come down here and I've shown you what Z looks like when it's spelled in Hebrew. It's a Zadeh and a Yod. Do you see that there? Zadeh and Yod. That's the word for Egypt. That's the phonetic equivalent of Z. It doesn't mean Egypt, okay, in this situation, all right, because you have zip Z. This is the Z. This is the first part, all right? That's really going to play an important part here in just a minute, which you'll see. Okay, On, which is found in Genesis 41:45, that's the city I was telling you about, the sacred city of the Hebrews that was started actually by Joseph and his father Israel. Genesis 41:45, as I've shown you, this is how it's spelled: Aleph, Vav, Nun. Final form, it's word 204. Now, so to name this place, to give it some importance, so that people would remember its connection, it's called Zion. All right, Zion. That's a compound of Zip Z, Egypt, with On, the sacred city of the Hebrews in Egypt. So what the prophet did was they dropped this Aleph at the beginning of the word right here. Okay, they dropped that Aleph and they only left the Vav and the Nun. That's what you have here. So Zion becomes Zadeh, Yod. They could have put the Aleph in there, but they dropped it. Again, there's a reason for that. It's conveying a secret message also, or hiding something that they don't want to be discussed right away, or to bring attention to it. Then you have the Vav and the Nun. So you have Zion. So where does this all lead us to now? Okay, it definitely is a connection between Zip, Z, Egypt, and the special sacred city of the Hebrews, the Israelites, of On. So it's telling you that they're referring back to the On in Egypt, which is why Christ went back there, not just to escape Herod, but because there had to be this connection with that particular place. Okay? Now, for those of you who are going, I don't understand what's going on here, let me point out a really interesting point here. Have you ever heard of the good ship Zion? Yeah, have you ever heard that phrase, Christians, the good ship Zion? It's very common in Mormonism, but at any rate, the good ship Zion. Well, isn't that funny? Because I'm going to show you something really interesting. When you take Zip Z, and you take just the Z part, which is from the Zion, right? So it's the Zadeh and the Yod, and you look that up in Strong's, it's word number 6716. You see this? And guess what it means? It means ship. It means ship. The good ship Zion. This is a double meaning. This is emphasis. Very, very important. So the good ship Zion, Z, and then you look at Zion itself, and it's the Z from the spelling of the ship and the On. I hope you see what's going on here. There's an interplay in the meaning of the words. So in fact, the word Zion, if you looked it up, would be word 6725 or 6726 in Strong's, showing you how it's spelled. But again, the prophets played with it, particularly in showing this conjunction, this relationship to Egypt, and a specific place in Egypt, Z, in Egypt, the city of On. That's the real Zion, Zion. Interesting. Well, study this a little bit. I've made this chart so you can kind of look at it and see. What I've talked to you about here is a little difficult to understand if you're not versed in it real well, but it really comes down to what I said at the beginning. In ancient languages, the phonetics, even in our language it is, but phonetics are very important, okay? So sometimes you can get the same phonetics spelling the word differently. For instance, in English, the word here I am, H-E-R-E, as opposed to I hear, H-E-A-R. Now in that case, they're two entirely different words, and that can also happen in Egyptian and in Hebrew as well. But in this case, it's a prophetic type. It's a prophetic emphasis. It's a prophetic mystical message. Zion, an Egyptian city of the Hebrews called On, out here.